And we're going to do it without busting our butt. You know, most of these backcountry areas, you really have to work in order to get into. But what we're going to do is we're going to use horses in Colorado. We're going to use planes in Alaska and drift boats in Argentina as well. So you ought to know by now, whenever you do, whenever you go to one of these presentations, there's no such thing as a free lunch. You know, somebody's always trying to sell you a guided trip, you know, on the Colorado River for $350. I went to one of these presentations about 4 years ago and wound up spending $7,000 on a trip to Argentina. So you're going to get by really easy tonight. All I would ask you to do is, if you live in Colorado and already don't have a subscription to Colorado Outdoors Magazine, you really should get one, because you'll learn how Parks and Wildlife manages your fish and game. And also you get to read the 3 or 4 articles that I write each year. So I have 2 books, actually. One that has been out for a couple of years now, Fly Fishing Colorado's Backcountry. It consists of 42 articles that I wrote for Colorado Outdoors over the last 20 plus years or so. And I updated those about 2 years ago and wound them into a series of chapters. It concentrates on fishing strategies for the backcountry, small streams and high lakes. About half of the book is exclusive to those categories. The other half of the book is relevant to fly fishing anywhere in the world, really, for trout. And I am currently working on this book, which should be out in April. I just sent out a first draft to my printer actually this afternoon. And this is a where to fish in the backcountry in Colorado. And it concentrates on high lakes. I cover 800 lakes in there. I've actually fished 600 of these lakes myself. I really couldn't believe it until I put together the index in the back. And all of these articles that are in here were previously published in Colorado Outdoors, and I updated those with new stocking data, visited a few of those that I hadn't fished in a while, and got some gillnet surveys in there. So they'll come out in April. And my books are available through my website, ronbelak.com. There's a link on that will take you to my printer, Book Baby, and they'll ship you the book. If you live in the Denver area on the west side, you know, I can do an arrangement also for an autographed copy. Okay, that's about it for the advertisement now. Let's talk about the backcountry a little bit. And can you see my pointer over down here? I think that shows up. Yes, we can do that. Okay, the backcountry is known by a number of different words, really. It's called the bush when you're up in Alaska. It could be the outback over in Argentina or over in Australia, the wilderness here in the Rocky Mountains. If you live in the Northeast, you might just call it the woods. If you look in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, they'll define backcountry as a remote, undeveloped, rural area. Well, you know, this is rural here, and I don't think any of us here in the Rocky Mountains would consider this the backcountry. We might consider this forested area in the back as the backcountry. So really, in order to get a good definition, you got to go to the Merriam-Belak fishing dictionary, and you can look up there and it'll say the backcountry is a location that takes considerable time or effort to reach from the nearest year-round paved road. And I want to stress that considerable effort and year-round paved road. I mean, we can all go up to Mount Evans and drive up. It's the highest paved road in North America. You can drive up to 12,800 feet and walk out of your car and fish for cutthroat trout in Summit Lake. But that's not a year-round paved road. You know, it's closed for most of the year, actually. So why fish the backcountry? Well, I think you want to avoid the crowds. You know, and I'd tell you that this is a photograph that I took in Cheeseman Canyon last fall, but I'd be lying. I took it in the spring. Unfortunately, for those of you that have seen my other presentation on fishing Colorado backcountry, I'm going to use some of the same jokes over here in the Colorado portion, but you know, you probably won't remember them anyways. I got new jokes for Alaska, and the ones for Argentina, they're in Spanish, so you're not going to get them anyways. But you want to fish the backcountry for beautiful scenery like this backcountry lake right over here. I mean, that's just gorgeous. Or do you want to fish the roadside pail water? I'll bet you all know where this is. This is the Blue River at the outlet malls. And there are some really nice trout there, but you know, you're going to have all this traffic up here. Sometimes you get people on the bridge that are going to cheer you on. And we fish the backcountry really because we love cutthroats here in Colorado. And it's only in the backcountry here in the Rocky Mountains that you're going to be able to get into some cutthroat trout. So the Colorado backcountry is accessible with really huge packs, you can see. You can do 6 to 10 mile round trip day hikes in order to get there. There's a lot here in the Front Range. Or you can do one-way 7 to 10 mile backpack trips if you want to stay overnight. You're going to climb at least 2,000 feet to get into a lot of these lakes and small streams, except for certain areas in Colorado. And one of the best is the flat tops. The flat tops, a lot of it is wilderness. It is that area in northwestern Colorado that is north of Interstate 70. It is east of Highway 13 that runs from Rifle up through Meeker, and then Highway 131 west of that runs up to Yampa. There's 1,500 square miles of area that you could fish up there with a variety, probably about 100 different lakes up there and untold miles of stream as well. The Flat Tops is known for obviously flat top mesas up here, and the elevation of the top is about 11,000 feet. It's held up by at least 1,500 feet of basalt flows there. There are lakes dotting the top, and there are incised valleys off the side here that have lakes perched in them as well. One of the lakes that I really love to fish is Trapper's Lake at 9,700 feet. I know West Denver used to do a trip there every year at one point. I don't know if you still do it now, but you can literally drive to within 400 yards of Trapper's Lake. And if you don't want to sleep on the ground, you know, there is a lodge here. And I'm going to make this point right now. I don't get any kickbacks from any of these lodges that I'm talking about. They're just places that I've stayed that I thought have done a really good job. You can stay at Trapper's Lake Lodge. It's a quarter mile away from the lake. It has some accommodations that are rustic but comfortable. Or you could stay at the nearby campground and walk the 250 yards to the lake. You can even accommodate a mid-size RV in there. Trapper's Lake's known for good ice out fishing. Of course, it fishes well through most of the year, but you'll be catching mostly cutthroat trout in the 13 to 15-inch category. And they're pretty much fat trout in there. They have a lot of food supply. Here's a close-up of one of the cutthroats. You also catch some brook trout. There's a smaller population, and they go up to about 15 inches or so. Now, if you are going to fish Trapper's Lake, and particularly at ice out, most people park in the outlet parking lot. And I would warn you about the marmots there. Everybody thinks these things are cute, but they're really not. They chew on everything. They chew on your boots. They'll chew a hole in your tent. They'll chew on automobile wires. I went up there about 5 years ago with two of my friends. We took my Toyota RAV4 and parked it in the parking lot, had a great day of fishing, came back, put the key in the ignition, and every idiot light went on. Didn't know what was wrong. Took it down to the dealership in Denver, and they said, Mr. Belak, they always start with Mr. So-and-so when they want to give you bad information. You had some rodent damage, that'll be $300. Well, I didn't think that was too bad. The fishing was so great, we went up the next weekend. And my friend said, we'll take up my Ford F-150. They only chew on those cheap Japanese cars. We went up in his F-150 and he had $1,000 worth of damage. So keep that in mind when you go up there. So when you go, depends on how comfortable you want to be. Trappers Lake has about 2 weeks of really, really great ice out fishing as soon as the ice goes off. This is probably one of the best weather days that I ever had up there during ice out. You know, usually get a lot of snow and stuff that goes on, or sleet. This was 2 years ago. This was June 21st, first day of summer, and we had 12 inches of snow there. The fish were on fire over there. They didn't care. The water was nice and warm, and they were wet anyways. So you have about 2 weeks worth of good ice out fishing, and then for 3 weeks, the fish go into a spawn and they move up the tributary streams, which are off limits to fishing to protect the spawning cutthroat. So the fishing in the lake is pretty slow for 3 weeks. As the water temperatures rise to the low 50s or so, the trout move back into the lake, and then you have a really nice calabatus hatch. You can still fish ice out techniques during the summer, and I'll talk about that as well. You want to fish ice out techniques with, you know, a 5 or 6 weight rod, a full sinking line, not a sink tip, full sinking, heavier line, a type 5 or type 6, so that you get down on the bottom, because that's where the fish are. Size 8 woolly buggers, black marabou leeches, Royal Coachman streamers, muddler minnows, orange soft hackles, all work really good. I usually put 2 of these things on and fish out of the belly boat. Water temperatures are in the low 40s, so you really have to be geared up in order to fish. Or, you know, you can wait until they get all the boats out and, you know, fish the dry flies as well as ice out techniques. The dry fly fishing starts with the calabatus hatch. It's a banker's hour type hatch. It starts at about 10 o'clock in the morning and goes through the early afternoon. You'll fish mostly the spinners. You'll fish things like catskill patterns, a mosquito or an Adams here in a 14. Parachutes work pretty good. For the nymph, you can fish a standard pheasant tail. Also during the summer, you'll fish caddisfly in the evening, especially along the willows. You know, I still think one of the best caddis adult patterns is Alcar caddis. You can fish the Gary LaFontaine sparkle pupa, gold rib hare's ear also for the pupa, and this is a pattern that I tie as well, a beadhead caddis. You want to fish midges in the evening, and this is anywhere in the backcountry in Colorado. Midges get a little bit more technical. You got to fish small patterns. You know, those things that are above the stick over here are to be fished in the film. You know, these patterns are all discussed in my book, this Andy's Flash Pupa, which was developed by someone in Pennsylvania to fish the kettle ponds in that area, or actually in Massachusetts, the kettle ponds there. This is really a game changer for fishing in the film. These patterns down below the stick are all things that you would fish anywhere from a few inches to 1.5 feet. You're all familiar with these things. These are the things that you fish in the tailwaters all the time, size 18 and 20. You don't need to fish anything smaller than the 20 in the backcountry. You know, forget about those 26s and stuff like that. I think the fly shops just invented those because they know us older people really can't tie them, so we got to buy them from them instead. Adult midges are really important, something like a simple black parachute or a black gnat in a size 18 or 20. And then the orange asher, which is a Colorado pattern, is basically a Griffith's gnat. I tie it with a tail and it has orange dubbing on it. It's a single midge. It works really well in a size anything from a 16 down to about a 20. 16 is my go-to pattern. Okay, you can also fish there outside of that lodge. There's several miles of the North Fork of the White River. It has a lot of smaller and smaller under 12-inch cutthroat and brook trout and a few rainbow in there as well. Great place to use a 7.5-foot 4-weight or something like a 10-carat rod. Now, if you want to get deeper into the backcountry, then you rent the horses. And I know they rent them at Trappers Lake, at Ripple Creek Lodge, Sable Mountain, Adams. They all have permits in various areas in the flat tops there. One of the areas they can take you into right out of Trappers Lake Lodge is just down the road is the trailhead for Skinny Fish Lake at 10,000 feet. You know, they can take you in there for an afternoon, or they can take you in for a multi-day trip to a drop camp, or they can stay with you and cook your food and give you some advice on the fishing if you need that. Skinny fish, I think, may produce the record brook trout at some time. And the reason I say this is that I've seen pictures of 5-pound fish that people have taken out of there in a brook trout. You know, a record 7 pounds, 10 ounces. And, you know, it has the perfect environment for that. You got to fish it out of a belly boat, though. So that's why you want to take the horses up. The cutthroat also are stocked in the lake above and make it down the stream. Okay, and the drainage to the south is the Marvine drainage. There are 2 lakes there, Lower Marvine and Upper Marvine. They're 85 and 55 acres in size. The upper lake there has a lot more willows along it, so it's a lot more difficult to fish from shore. This is about a 7-mile hike in, and this is why I would suggest you take horses up there. This is an overnight, multi-day trip. I think Sable Mountain Outfitters and Adams Lodge can take you in there. You'll be catching mostly brook trout in there. It's very good early in the season at ice out for 10 to 12-inch brookies up there. There are also a smaller population of cutthroat that are stocked in there, and they get up to about 16 inches with a few bigger ones. The a small stream that drains out of Lower Marvine Lake is excellent for small brook trout and cutthroat, and you've got 7 miles of this all the way to the trailhead that you can fish. Let's talk another area about another area in the flat tops here, and I'm going to talk about Bear Lake here. This is accessible out of Yampa by a paved road that then changes into a well-graded dirt road. Bear Lake is situated between 2 large irrigation reservoirs, Stillwater and Yamcola, which are fisheries in themselves, but the water level fluctuates a lot with irrigation needs. Bear Lake's water rights are owned by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and it keeps a stable level in the lake there. As a result, you have a lot of stable vegetation. They stock it heavily with catchable rainbows, but the rainbows hold over in there quite well. And so you'll catch some up to 14, 15 inches. Good ice out fishing, really good evening midge fishing during the summertime. There are also some browns in there and a few brookies and cutthroat that come in from the stream up above, as well as a population of whitefish. So a lot of hodgepodge over there. Now, this is one of those areas that I'm talking about tonight that you can go in yourself and not bust your butt. You can take in a motor vehicle in there, and I'll bet most of you don't have a vehicle that's really so nicely painted up like this with the rainbow trout on the side door and stuff. You know, I'm not quite sure what sort of vehicle this is. I think it may be a Dodge Ram, but I certainly know what his favorite pattern is. So Bear Lake, 9,800 feet, you can drive almost right up to the thing, and you want to fish this out of a belly boat because the shoreline is a little shallow. You can catch some fish there in the evening, just fishing from shore, but best out of a belly boat or canoe. You'll be catching these rainbows, like I said, mostly 12-inch, but up to 14 or 15. The river up above for a couple miles or so is a sinuous river, the Bear River. And you can see up here how close the road is. So you can park along the shoulder and walk down. This is excellent fishing with a smaller rod, or I fished it with a 10-carat rod. and they have browns in there. It's principally browns in this in this portion of the river, and they get up to about 15 inches. You want to fish the undercut banks, you know, with a couple of nymphs there. You also walk up there and you'll see these pods of 17, 18, and 19-inch fish there. And you'll drift through those, but you'll get no takes, you know, and you'll wonder what's going on. Then you'll realize something looks a little strange. And then you realize there are pods of whitefish in there. Occasionally you'll hook one, but most of them aren't as aggressive as the browns. Let's move on up and talk about the last area in the flat tops, which is going to be in the backcountry, and it's up above Stillwater Reservoir, and you'll get up to 11,000 feet here. A lot of outfitters can take you in there. There's 3 or 4 different outfitters. One of their favorite lakes is Deer Lake. It's only about 10 or 12 acres, but it has some pretty nice cutthroat. Not a lot of fish in there, but you're going to catch some bigger cutthroat, mostly in the 15-inch range. I've caught them larger in there as well. It's good for, you know, maybe an afternoon or maybe a one-night stay there, and then maybe move on to the island lakes. This first lake is really too shallow to hold fish. This is Upper Island right here, and it has a large concentration of cutthroat in there, mostly 12-inch on average, up to 14 or so. And then there is a lower island lake as well, which has the same sort of fishing. So if you want more information on the flat tops, I wrote 2 articles last year for Colorado Outdoors. They're in the May, June, and July, August issues, or you could just wait for the book to come out in April. Both of those articles are reproduced in the book. Okay, let's move on to Alaska. This is my favorite fishing destination away from home. So how do you get around there? Mostly by drift boats and float planes. I don't profess to be an expert on Alaska, but I've been up there fishing maybe about 14 times or so. And have fished mostly on the Kenai Peninsula here, a lot on the Kenai River. I've also fished over in Lake Clark National Park along here, several of the rivers that drain in, and also Lake Iliamna area and up by Fairbanks, Chena River. And then I fished for Rainbow's steelhead down in Southeast Alaska on the Seatuck down there. So I've got a little bit of a variety on Alaska. We're going to talk about the Kenai Peninsula here and then the Lake Iliamna. So I'll talk about Rainbow King Lodge, which is a trip my brother and I did about 12 years ago or so. This is an upper end lodge. It's fly out every day that the weather is good. One of the rivers that we fished there was the Upper Tulare River. And this is the river that would be extremely impacted by the Pebble Mine, which is in the same drainage, just higher up. And we actually saw people taking water samples there at the mouth of the river 12 years ago when we were up there. Jim, which is listening in here, here's a shot of Jim Bolton. He and I fished the Upper Tulare one day. They flew us out, landed on a gravel bar at first light, and we went out and started to fish for silvers there. And as far as numbers of silvers, this had to be my top day for catching silvers. I think Jim and I each caught about 20 fish. Fishing from first light to about 11:30 in the morning or so. And we started out fishing for them. Here's a nice silver right here. And they're a little bit colored up because they have to move a long way from the ocean to get up to Lake Iliamna. But we started out with dry flies, the pink pollywog. This is kind of my version of the pink pollywog. Seeing that I can't tie a button onto a shirt, I have some trouble with some other aspects of fly tying, like spinning deer hair. I never liked it. I can do it, but it takes a long time for me to get it right and to trim it. And so I just got a strike indicator and fixed it onto the hook. dress it up with a little marabou. These things don't sink, by the way. They're just you'll never sink one of these things. All it is balsam wood there, and the fish hit these things. We caught 2 or 3 fish a piece on pink pollywogs before we started to fish with a series of different nymphs and streamers here. These are typical silver patterns, any of the flash flies or an everglow, egg-sucking leeches, the popsicle, white rabbit leeches. This is something that I've just tied up over the years. It doesn't have a name. It's just pink. Silver is really like pink with a little silver tinsel. And believe it or not, I really had to work in order to catch a silver on a black marabou leech. Every fish in Colorado will hit this thing at one time or another, but the silvers were kind of persnickety on that. They're another nice buck. Then we had shore lunch and we moved upriver and we caught some nice rainbow trout up there, up to about 22 inches or so. There were also some lake trout that moved into the river from the lake. We also fished the Copper River, and this is not the Copper River that produces the sockeyes that you find in King Soopers and Safeway. It's a different Copper River. It's kind of like our Willow Creek or Trout Creek here in Colorado. There's just a lot of them. But this was another one. They flew us out and landed us on right at the mouth. We had to do a little bit of walking here. I think it was 5 or 6 miles that we actually walked up. Fortunately, we're all a little younger back then. And then we fished downstream, and we fished, it was smaller water, so you could cover it easier. We fished these runs and gravel bars, and we fished for rainbows. And the rainbows were in there because the sockeyes were spawning, and the rainbows were hanging out downstream and catching the eggs. You know, anybody that's fished in Alaska from about mid-August through September and early October knows the egg hatch. You know, the guides really get pretty specific on the beads. And I know I've done this too. You experiment with various sizes and colors. You get out your nail polish and you paint the things up. And they represent various stages of decay. And the combination of that and the light on the river, you know, will actually turn a trout on to a specific bead at certain times. These are affixed to anywhere from 8 to 10 feet of leader, about an inch up from the hook. And we had some pretty nice fishing for rainbows there, up to, you know, 22, 23 inches or so. You always have to watch out for bears. You know, I don't worry about them in Colorado. I hang my food in the tree. I've had more bears around my house than anywhere in the backcountry in Colorado. And even though we keep our garbage inside and everything, there's just more bears around here in Evergreen. But you always have to look over your shoulder. You know, some of these bears, especially the coastal ones, you could put your size 10 or 11 shoe inside their print. I've seen some of these big boys that have pushed 800 pounds. And so you're always looking out for some of these things. And don't worry, I took this with a long telephoto lens. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here. Now, I did a little bit of research on bears here just recently. About 2 weeks ago, I got out on the internet and I found this article. And this is too true to really make up. But this was from the Associated Press. It was published back in February. Alaskan woman using an outhouse was attacked by a bear from below. The bear was in the vault of all places. And the Alaskan woman had the scare of her lifetime last weekend when using an outhouse in the backcountry. You know, that's the last thing that you expect. Can you imagine this woman getting in there and dropping her drawers there and sitting on the seat and then getting bit in the butt by a bear? You know, and it turned out it wasn't a grizzly bear, it was a black bear, you know, and obviously, you know, didn't take off her hindquarters, but she needed a little bit of first aid. So here's a nice Alaskan rainbow trout, and you can always tell an Alaskan rainbow trout by the color of the stripe. This nice lavender here, and then on the gill plate, the lavender. When you see one of these in a magazine, you know the fish is from Alaska. You can also fish some still water in Alaska. This is Crescent Lake, which is located on the Kenai Peninsula. It's out of Seward. It's about a 2.5 to 3 mile hike up to Crescent Lake. And there's about, I'd say about 1,500 feet of relief, but you're going from sea level up to 1,500 feet. The tundra is at 1,500 feet, not 11,000 or 12,000 like in Colorado. I've been up to this lake 3 times. The first 2 times I went up there, I was by myself. When I went up with Peg, the 3rd time, a float plane came in. So there actually are some outfitters out of Soldotna that will fly a float plane in, drop you off in the morning, and come and pick you up in the late afternoon. What are you catching up there? Well, you're dry fly fishing up there for grayling. So you leave the 8-weight or 7-weight behind. You're not throwing lead. You know, you're fishing dry flies and maybe a nymph on a dropper over there and catching grayling. Now, the grayling on the Kenai Peninsula don't get really big, but this is the best lake for size of grayling. They get up to about 15 inches. And so most of the grayling you're going to catch are going to be between about 12 and 15 inches. The last place that I'll talk about in Alaska is the Kenai River, and I'm sure a number of you have fished that, and you're going to be wondering why I'm calling this the backcountry. Well, there's about 6 or 7 miles from the Russian River ferry in the wildlife reserve over here that goes down into Belak Lake. The lower 2 miles or so, there's no access because you got to go through a canyon on a drift boat, and there's no road. There is a road on the upper part that runs along, but like most places in Alaska, the bush is so thick there and the banks are so high that it's tough to get into the river. And there's maybe about 5 or 6 places where you can get into the river and fish one gravel bar for maybe 100 feet or so, or maybe 100 yards at the most. So it really is meant for drift boat fishing, and you can get away from the shore fishermen. You will have other drift boats, obviously, there. So we were doing this trip about every 2 years up until COVID hit. And then we didn't trust each other, so we didn't do the trip anymore. Plus, we didn't want to get on a plane to go to Alaska. But we would rent an RV, and we would contract with a guide for 3 or 4 days to take us down the river. And we would park there at the Russian River Ferry and live out of the RV for a few days. And then what we would do is we would move the RV to other rivers that we knew, Quartz Creek or Ptarmigan Creek or something, wherever we heard the fishing was good. Instead of doing hotels, and when you're stuck at one area, if the fishing isn't any good there, you're stuck with the hotel. So this way we could move our hotel with us. There is probably about a 1/4 mile or so of the Kenai that you can actually fish there at the Russian River Ferry. It's not the most productive water, and it's a little difficult to wade in there, but you can at least fish for a few hours there or so. And then you're going to get in your drift boats the next morning and float down the river. You'll fish out of the boats as well as fishing on the gravel bars. And this is what I really prefer, is to get out and wade and fish one of these gravel bars. And of course, the fish change, the gravel bars change from year to year. You'll catch some nice rainbows there. Most of the rainbows you're going to be catching are probably between 15 and 23 inches, with the average one probably be about 18 or 19 inches or so. This one's a little bit bigger. This is about 22-inch fish right here. Here's another larger rainbow trout. You'll also catch some really nice dolly vardens there, and the dollies get as large as the rainbows. I've caught dollies there up to 25 inches. My biggest rainbow was 27, which was dwarfed by my friend who caught a 36-incher there right at the mouth of Belak. I estimated it was about 12 pounds or so. But I actually like to catch these dollies more than the rainbows. The rainbows jump and all, but the dollies, they're like big brook trout. They nose down and give you a real good tug on there. And of course, when you're in there in September, they start to really start to color up with their lipstick and their orange coloration and pink coloration on bellies. There's another close-up right there. You'll have a lot of wildlife there as well. A lot of eagles, very common, common mergansers, and of course, grizzly bears. You won't see them as much, but you'll see one at least every other day. So, ahora vamos a Argentina. So, I'm saying now we're going to Argentina. And when you do travel in South America, I've been down to Argentina a couple of times and been to Peru and Ecuador. That doesn't make me a world traveler, but I will honorably take that title, at least for tonight. But it is good to learn a little Spanish. I mean, when I was in high school and college, I had to take 2 years of French, and it doesn't do you any good down there. So I had no schooling at all in Spanish. And I took out some Pimsleur's tapes and studied, went through a dozen or 14 of those tapes and could at least utter some words of appreciation and stuff when I was down there. And it got me out of a jam a couple of times, once in the airport in Buenos Aires and another time in Lima, Peru, when I had to get into a car and they took us into Lima because our flight was delayed and the driver didn't speak any English at all and just a few words to communicate. And so that really helps. It's also courteous just so you could say a few things to the guide. I mean, the guides at the better lodges are fluent in English. Some of them are bilingual from grammar school or so their English is just as good as ours, you know, and so it's just courteous. You don't learn the Spanish to fish because in parentheses there is las truchas no hablan español tampoco, which means the trout don't speak Spanish either. So let's talk about Patagonia here. You know, it's the lower part, the lower third or so of Argentina here. I'm going to be talking about 2 lodges here, the Patagonia River Guides, which is a really upscale lodge, and a very nice lodge, the Rio Manso. I've been to Patagonia once and Rio Manso twice. So a few statistics on Patagonia. You know, it's about the size of California, Washington, Oregon, and Nevada all put together. So it's pretty sizable. Yet they're all, and it's at a latitude of 38 to 55 degrees south latitude. So we would be looking at 38 right about here, and then going down to 55 as you go down to Tierra del Fuego. But there are only 4 million people there. I mean, you can look at any one of these states that I put up there with the exception of Nevada and start picking out large cities with that many people. And they speak Spanish down there. You know, when you're in Bariloche up here, you know, in the airport and stuff and some of the touristy restaurants, you'll get some of the Argentines that will speak, you know, English, some of them quite well. But when you get down here into no man's land, you know, you're going to rely on your guides there for the communication, unless you speak Spanish. There's poor infrastructure there, not a lot of roads. They have 1/10 the number of roads that we have in the United States. And so there are whole sections of national parks there that have no road at all that go into it. So that makes for good backcountry. The terrain, you know, you'll be fishing up against the Andes over here in the foothills. It's not very high elevation, you know, maybe 3,000 feet. You'll be fishing on the Pampas, the grasslands down here as well, and maybe a couple thousand feet of elevation. You know, in South America, the higher mountains are up there in Peru and Ecuador. That's where you get the 20,000 foot peaks. You know, as you go farther south in South America, the Andes get lower and lower until they get down to sea level here at Tierra del Fuego. And of course, up here by Bariloche, the highest peaks might be 11,000, 10,000 feet or so. So you don't have to worry about altitude sickness. Climate, it's kind of like our mountains or like Montana. You know, of course, the seasons are flipped. So there's spring, you know, kind of November, and then into the summer in December. One thing I do need to mention is that Patagonia is like Wyoming with wind. It's like Wyoming with wind. So you will fish a lot of wind there, especially if you get farther south. One of the best books that I found on fly fishing in Patagonia is this guide by Barrett Madison and Evan Jones. People tell me it's out of print now. The rivers that I fished down there in the lakes, you know, I looked up in the book, and when I fished them, boy, they just nailed these waters. So if you can get your hands on a copy of this and you're going to go to Patagonia, I'd certainly recommend that. A few statistics about fly fishing there. You know, we didn't have any trout in the southern hemisphere. Trout are a product of the northern hemisphere. They were introduced down into Patagonia in 1904. And why were they introduced? Because they had these big river systems down there, and the biologists looked at them and said, there aren't enough fish here. You know, we ought to try planting some of those trout down here. Maybe we could get some of those gringos coming down here to fish for them and pay us the big bucks. So they did, and they were very successful. They planted rainbows, browns, and brookies. No cutthroat down there. You're going to have to go to the mountains here in Colorado and other western states for cutthroat. There are also some landlocked salmon down there, and anadromous salmon as well, particularly down south. Mostly silver salmon and king salmon. The native fish down there is the perca, which is a perch, and the payere, which is a silver side or a shad. You'll fish freestone rivers, spring creeks, which are my favorite either. And that's saying a lot for a guy that likes to fish lakes, but that's certainly my favorite. Of course, you'll fish lakes, and then you'll fish there are a few tailwaters down there, not many. Access is via the estancias, which are big ranches, tens of thousands of acres, private ranches, and then the national park system down there, which allows permit fishing. And the lodges have arranged some permits down there with the national park. There are hatches down there of mayflies and caddisflies, but they're not prolific at all. They're nothing like what we have up in North America. A lot more hatches of dragonflies and damselflies. There's a lot of terrestrials that blow onto the water. There are bait fish there, the native bait fish, smaller trout. They do have scuds, and then they have a crab that's called a pancora. And the crabs are native to those river systems that drain into the Atlantic. And that does not necessarily mean on the east side of the Andes, because there are a whole series of incised valleys across the country there, and some of the rivers actually flow south and then flow west into the Pacific. Flies, dragonflies, large attractor patterns, chubby Chernobyls, psycho ants, fat Alberts, often with a dropper, a number 8 or 10 or 12 San Juan worm. They fish with copper johns, prince nymphs, pheasant tails. You know, they don't have enough fly shops down there, so they haven't invented enough flies. When you fish with streamers, you also fish things size 8, olive slump busters, fortune cookies, you know, damsel nymphs, some of the streamers that we fish, muddler minnows as well. So that all works down there. If you go from Denver down to Patagonia, you're probably going to fly first into Houston or fly into Atlanta. Then it's an overnight trip to Buenos Aires. You get in at, I don't know, 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning or so, and you're wasted, especially if you've flown United. And you'll be wasted there, and it's best to then have a hotel room and spend the day catching up in Buenos Aires. Fortunately, there's not much of a time lag for us. It's 2 hours. For us in Denver, it's the same time zone there. I think, or maybe an hour different from East Coast time. So you really don't have to worry about jet lag, just being tired. You know, there's a lot of things to do in Buenos Aires. It's a cosmopolitan city. There's parks that you can do. You can go to the art district. The Recoleta area up here is really interesting to take on a little history. You can do a tour of the city there. And then what you do is the next day you fly out of a different airport that's all the way over on the other side of town, the domestic airport. So they've got two airports, one for international and then the domestic. And that in itself is a little complicated. You can get a concierge service to do that. I wouldn't try it because I don't speak Spanish, you know, so I would have a hard time getting the taxi and getting over there and stuff. But if you're fairly fluent in Spanish, you can do it yourself. So we'll talk about the Patagonia area over here. We'll talk a little bit about fishing around Bariloche up here. We'll talk about this lake district in Cerces National Park. And we'll talk about fishing on the Pampas, the Arroyo Pescada over here. So this is the Patagonia River Guides Lodge here. It's the main lodge. The hotel rooms and everything that you'll stay are out of sight over here. This is where you get your meals and where you'll gear up in the morning. This particular lodge, you don't bring anything but yourself and a change of underwear to go there. Literally, they provide you with, well, obviously a raincoat and stuff too, but they provide you with 6-weight Winston rods, all the tackle that you'll need. They even provide you with top of the line Sims waders as well. So you don't have to bring any fishing supplies. They even have a vineyard over there. They're just kind of getting started. Their Chardonnay was okay. The Malbec needed a little work yet, but you get to taste some of their wines if you're on their good side.
There are others.
Yeah, and this is a scenery right at the end of the driveway here, looking at the Andes. Dining in Argentina is really good. You know, you'll be eating a lot of really lean steaks and lamb, a lot of seafood as well. And of course, you'll have copious amounts of vino tinto, which is red wine, mostly Malbecs and some Cabernets. We fished the Rio Grande, which is one of the few tailwaters there, comes out of one of the big hydroelectric dams. Didn't fish much like a tailwater to me. It fished more like a freestone because it's really big. And this is one of the problems in Argentina. Look at the dense vegetation along shore. Really hard to get in there. You don't have a lot of situations like this where you could wade. So you're in a boat fishing most of the time in the rivers. This was one of the our lunch break over here where the guide went out and he made a few casts there, got some of the tackle straightened out, some of the knots that we put in fishing in the morning. And you can see there's a private home there and they've got a little beachfront area over here on the Rio Grande. Nice rainbows down there. I wouldn't say these fish were huge. You know, most of them were 15, 18 inches in the Rio Grande. Occasionally you catch a 20-incher, but not very many. We fished Los Alerces National Park. We fished a combination of rivers and lakes up there. Lago Verde or Green Lake was one lake that we put in. This is several hundreds of acres in here. It might have even been 1,000 acres, Lago Verde. A natural lake, and we put in there in the morning and we fished along shore. We fished these reeds. And our guide here was rowing the boat very slowly, looking for rise forms there. The trout would come up between the willows or on the reed edge over there. And so he was looking for trout there. And nice rainbows in the lake. There were also a few browns, and I missed a really nice brook trout in there. And then in the afternoon, we went literally in the boat from the river or from the lake into the Rio Arianes there and fished the river. I had a nice shore lunch there. And of course, their shore lunches are as big as any dinner you would get here in the United States, and very elaborate, and mas vino tinto, a lot of mucho vino tinto. And again, a lot of rainbows there and some browns in there as well. Another river, the Rio Rivadavia, that we fished, again in the Los Alerces National Park, had some really fat rainbows in there. So we had snow one night. It didn't snow on our lodge, but it snowed about 1,000 feet up from the lodge. And we took a really chilly motorboat ride across Lago Kruger there. And the reason we did that is that was the access to the stream or the river that flowed in there. There was no other access there. And you can see that there was a lot of snow. We saw, I think, 3 or 4 condors when we were going on the boat ride. And so we went into the Rio Fray. And this is a really odd way to fish, but we were fishing mostly for browns in there. And our guide would keep the boat still there. And then we would cast downstream with big weighted streamers and strip them back towards the boat. And the fish would hit those things and they would hook themselves, even hook them. We didn't hook any of the torrent ducks, but they were really nice to look at. And there were a lot of vegetation along the stream there. You can see there was actually bamboo down there along the stream. So really dense, really difficult if you were going to fish from shore. But these were some of the browns. And most of the browns that we caught were in the 18 to 20 inch category. Another nice brown. The biggest fish of the trip was a 25-inch brown that was taken out of the Rio Fray. My favorite were the spring creeks. This was Arroyo Pescado, or Arroyo Pescado in Argentine Spanish. You know, those of us here in the West are familiar with Arroyo in Castilian Spanish. You know, it's a dry stream bed that might have a little bit of water in there during a flash flood or in the spring. But down there, the Arroyo means spring creek. And then pescado is fish. So this was Fish Creek. And you can see it's fairly sizable, but it's pretty tranquil there. This was on an estancia and a huge cattle and sheep ranch down there. We saw some of the sheep, not very many of them. They move them away from the river because they make money off of leasing these to the lodges over there. You gear up in your waders, but you're not allowed to wade. You walk the stream and you sight fish. And that's what made it really fun, was sight fishing. Or you'd get to some structure and the guy said, well, you know, they're lined up in here, you know, fish this area over there. And so these spring creeks were really fun to fish. Lots of flamingos that would come off the river down there. You had black-necked swans down there. So there's some really good birding down there as well. And obviously some nice rainbow trout in there. We caught fish up to 20 inches in the spring creeks. Brown trout as well. And then here's one of the silver sides, the Payeri over there. That's the native shad type fish. Crested caracara, which is a member of the falcon family, and it's the only falcon that will feed on dead animals and stuff, very similar to our vultures. So they eat mostly carrion in their diet, which is really odd for falcons. The Rio Guajaina, I hope I didn't butcher that name too bad, but that's a really tough one to pronounce. But this was one of my favorites because it was small and you wrap up the numbers of fish here. And unfortunately, the wind was blowing about 40 miles an hour background that day. I could only cast about 15 feet with all my might. That's all you needed to cast because there were waves and ripples on the water, so the fish were right up against shore. There's one of the perca, the perch. And then there's one of the 20-inch rainbow that the guide's holding there. for me. He got really sick of holding all the fish that I pictures of. And nice browns in the spring creeks as well. This is the last place that I'll talk about, which is the Rio Manso Lodge, which is up near Bariloche. And out of the Rio Manso, you can fish the Rio Manso River, various stretches of it, but the really large fish are in the lakes there. And so if you really like to fish still water out of a boat, have somebody row you around, this is a really good place to do it. This is the scenery right off the lawn. You know, where are you going to get scenery like that? That's great. They had southern lapwings that were running around on the lawn. This one finally got irritated with me when I was taking its picture and kind of chased me away. I mean, they're not really big birds, but ashy-headed geese. And then this was the central area there where everybody kind of met for cocktails before dinner. And of course, the dinners were really good there too. They had some barbecues there. They did a lamb over there for us one night, and they did steaks the other night, fillets. And of course, here's a picture of Peggy, and she's just really enjoying her calamari over there. So, and of course, a big glass of vino tinto. This I shot right out of our bedroom. Of course, I used a telephoto lens to get this, but this was the backdrop, the Tronador Glacier over there, which the peak is, I think, 11,300 feet. And this is the water supply really from the Rio Manso. This is a picture of the Rio Manso. Again, you got really dense vegetation along shore. I guess Manso in Spanish means tranquil or tranquil waters. It's not, you know, it looks tranquil, but there's really actually a pretty good current. You know, it's kind of like when you look at the Mississippi, you know, just a big slow moving piece of water there, but you realize the current is really pretty great. Well, this isn't any Mississippi, but it's a pretty good sized river, and you need the boat in order to fish. Another stretch. Nice rainbows in there and some browns and occasional brookies in there as well. This was a smaller stretch of the Rio Manso, and I really enjoyed this. This fishing. The trout were a little bit smaller there, mostly 12 to 15 inches. The biggest ones we caught were 18 inches, but we got to fish some dry flies, particularly in a back eddy over here. There was a back eddy, and it was a really difficult cast. It was about a 40-foot cast that you had to do kind of half sidearm in order to get beneath the overhanging deciduous vegetation. There were a bunch of fish coming up and popping caddis, you know. So we put on some Alcar caddis, the two of us in the boat, and we were able to get some casts in there. And of course, you know, the current would take it back. And I think we caught about 3 fish a piece. You know, if the casting was easier, we probably would have doubled the number of fish, but the fish were really coming up. And you know, I looked at the guide and I said, boy, those fish were really going to town. And you know, he just sheepishly nodded his head. And I could tell by the expression on his face that he did not know that American expression, going to town. So I had to explain it to him. So, you know, you get this guide, you know, 3 days in a row or something, and you build up a rapport with him, and then all of a sudden he starts teaching you all these off-colored expressions in Spanish. So here was one of the rainbows out of there. Lago Hess, which is a lake right within walking distance of the lodge, just a quarter mile or so. Again, you're fishing a lot of these reeds. There's a small stretch that you can fish off the bridge there if you want to go walk over there and fish. Nice rainbows and browns in there. Some really big browns too. Blackface Ibis. This was one of the lakes, Lago Franc, the large Lago Franc. Misty morning there. This is one of their better producers as far as numbers of fish, and also some pretty sizable fish. Again, you're fishing out of the boat, casting toward shore. The fish are picking up dragonflies and damselflies and terrestrials on the water. Nice rainbows, a lot of rainbows in the 18 to 23 inch category. In Argentina, in Patagonia, at least in this area, the Grand Slam is only 3 fish. You know, they don't have the cutthroat, so you got to catch in the same day from the same water. You got to catch a trout, you got to catch a brown trout and a rainbow, but they all have to be over 20 inches. 20 inches or over. And I was fortunate enough to do that one day. The brook trout is the hardest one to get over 20 inches, but there were some really healthy brookies in there. There's another, a big fistful of brook trout. And here is one of the biggest browns that I caught. This was 25 inches. And I caught him on a size 8 damselfly in about 18 inches of water, a little rivulet that came into the lake there, and spotted the fish. Couldn't tell how big it was, and made a cast before my guide could say cast there. And then I hooked the fish before he could say set. And he got a chance to hold it for me. But this was the biggest brown I've caught. I don't fish for browns all that often in Colorado because I'm fishing the high country and they're not stocked there. So this was really good. I went back to the lodge and boasted of my 25-inch brown. And of course, the gentleman that had fished Lago Hess caught a 26-inch brown and a 28-inch brown in the same day there. So I sheepishly went back to the bar and poured myself another glass of Belak. Great shore lunches over there. And then here's Lago Roca, which is only about 2 or 2.5 miles from the lodge, but it's a nasty 4-wheel drive road. Peggy and I actually hiked up Martin Mountain about 1,500 feet or so to look down on this. You know, we were told that this was a hike on their website. You know, you can hike up the Martin Mountain, you know, and get these expansive views, and we certainly did. And we asked the guide, because he pulled out a machete and started hacking the trail. We said, you know, you advertise this on your website, but you know, when's the last time you took somebody up here? He says, oh, about 5 years ago. Everybody just wants to fish. So very, very nice lake there. Some large fish in there, greater grebes down there. They sound like loons. All the guides down there were convinced they were loons. And I said, no, you don't have loons in the Southern Hemisphere. They're up north. They sound like loons, exactly like loons. And you know, then we showed them, they had a big birding book in there, and we were able to show them the great grebe over there. So they learned something from the gringo, I guess. Here's Rich Pulaski with a nice rainbow trout there. Again, more brook trout, brown trout over there. Some of these tactics that I talk about the backcountry, like fishing at ice out with full sinking lines and stuff, they don't fish that way down there. You know, they'll fish a sing tip with a streamer. And what I did when they weren't taking dries is I went into the back of the boat. I let Richard fish dries up the front, and I fished out of the back of the boat. And I stripped out about 40 feet of line, a type 5 line, sinking line, and put a big streamer on the bottom and bounced it off the bottom. And the guy thought I was a little odd with doing that until I started to catch fish like crazy. And then he said, oh, well, we're going to do that tomorrow too. And of course, I caught this fish, which was another 25-inch brown. So he was kind of convinced on that. So thank you very much for coming tonight. And I'll certainly stick around. Actually, I'm going to stick around all night here, but I'm going to stick around for you.
No, I'm muting it.
Yes.
They can talk to him.
Great job, Ron. Thanks very much.
So do I have to unshare, or can you take this away from me, Ed? Or do I just get out of this?
Yeah,
Oh,
I think you have to stop
Ed,
sharing.
now you get my 2 books over here, you know, the one on fishing the backcountry and then
Right,
one on
muted. You can see.
Okay, Ron, great job. Thank you.
Here, look in the
Hi,
camera.
Ron. Bye, Peggy. Thank you.
Here you go.
Bye.
So long. Any questions?
I got the one book. I'll look forward to the next one.
You're now
Thanks,
on-
CJ.
Right here.
Ron, thanks. Great job.
Thank you.
He's trying to